All right, I think this is now noon, and it is time to start. Welcome, everybody. This is welcome to Engage Track 1, the third learning session, which today is on the topic of training and orienting patient family advisors. This is Boris calling from Hospital Quality Institute. And just to be sure we are all on the correct webinar, Track 1 is where we are working to establish patient and family advisory councils, as well as other alternative ways of engaging families and patients as partners in improvement and operations as well. And, of course, we have Libby Hoy and PFCC Partners as our guide in this process. And we are on this journey through the end of September. It's been 4 weeks since we last met on the webinar and learned about recruitment of patient family advisors. Today we'll have a chance to discuss how everybody's doing, learn a little bit about what is going on in your respective efforts, and then learn new content on training and orienting patient family advisors. And then we'll have a 2-month pause to allow you ample time to work not only on recruiting families and patients, but also on orienting them, and we'll gather again in July. More on that in just a moment. First, I'd like to just give a little bit of logistical information. Many of you noticed we are recording the webinar. We like to make recordings available for future reference. The phone lines are all unmuted. We are keeping everything unmuted on our end so that we can promote open dialogue as much as possible. But because of that, we ask you to be in charge of muting your own line, and you can do that on your phone in the usual way, or you can do it by dialing 4* and then again 4* to unmute when you're ready to speak. And, of course, as usual, use the chat function to ask questions or make comments, and you can direct this to individuals or to the everybody on the webinar. And I'd like you to, as before, use your chat function right now. So those of you who are attending as a group and only one person is logged into the webinar, we'd like to know who else is with you. So if you could just type into chat box the names, the full names, first and last name of all the people who are present today from the organization. And that pertains also to those who under participants are just showing one first name. Would be great to have your full name if possible, for example, for Chelsea and some others. Suzanne, for example. There are a few Suzannes on the roster, so it would be nice to know which one that is. And moving on, this is the full schedule for Track 1. Just a reminder, we have a member portal, as you all know, on the HQI's Engage website. And all these materials are kept there. All the historical recordings and slides are there for your use ongoingly. And as you know, the portal has 2 sections. One is called Curriculum, where each learning session content is saved. And then the second one is called Community. And that's where we are currently posting your draft documents, your vision statements, your charters, your recruitment documents. And the intent there is not to show your perfect, finished, polished products, but also work in progress, which is where most of you are at right now. And we see pretty significant benefit in everybody being exposed and seeing how these drafts look for everybody else, as well as get some sense for the feedback that Libby is providing in these drafts, so that we all we feel like that enriches the learning and strengthens your individual efforts as well. Just a reminder that the program today has been approved for continuing education for quality, nursing, and executives. And in order to claim those credits, make sure that you complete the evaluation. The link will be given at the end of the webinar. So click on that link right from your screen, and you should be able to get into the eval. We will also be sending that link to everybody after the webinar in case you missed it. And I want to bring your attention to individual coaching calls also appearing on this schedule. They're integral part of this program, and it is our expectation that each team, each hospital will have 2 30-minute coaching calls at a minimum completed by the end of the program in September. And kudos to those of you, some of you have already done it, some of you had 1 or even 2 coaching calls, but if you haven't, please schedule one soon. And on the screen, you can see the schedule, and of course we're now in May, so we've got June 7th and 16th opened, and then subsequent months as well. So keep that in mind. And I keep reiterating also, we would love for you to keep our capstone event for the program on your calendars. We want to see everybody in Fairfield, hosted by Sutter Health here in Northern California on September 16th. We'll provide program closure and some more learning and exchange. It should be a really fun event, and Track 1 and Track 2 will come together to share and learn from each other and and celebrate what's been accomplished. And we're doing only one event. As in the beginning, you'll remember that our kickoffs were 2 regionally based. This will be only one event for the entire state, so we can have the richness of learning from a large number of hospitals. And we will provide some travel support for those that are traveling more than 100 miles round trip. So stay tuned for that. And here are the participating hospitals. These are sort of our standard slides that you see every time, and of course this is all available on the member portal. Here's our team, both HQIs and PFCC partners. And with that, I will thank you for indulging this brief introduction, and I am now ready a little bit to hand it over to you to lead the rest of the webinar.
Terrific. Thank you, Boris, and I didn't realize I had control yet, so I apologize for flipping your slides ahead. Thank you, and thank you to everybody that's joining the call today. I'm very excited to hear from your teams and see how you're progressing with the recruitment, and then dive into our content for today in terms of preparing and orienting patient family advisors. I think this is probably one of the biggest areas of learning for me early on in my efforts as a patient family advisor, was that really context was everything. And so we're going to talk today and help you develop a 3-step approach to orientation that results in providing your advisors the context that they need to be really impactful for your organizations. You guys are putting in a lot of effort. We want you to be able to get a lot back out of that. We'll have access to orientation materials to support them in setting the context specifically around advisory councils and the role of advisor themselves. And then finally, you will have the resources and support to develop your orientation program for your advisors. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a look back over the last month, and I recognize and want to alleviate any anxiety. We don't expect that you'll have a full crew of patient family advisors recruited and ready for their orientation quite yet. We know that you're going to need a little bit more time into this next learning session. But with that said, we'd just like to sort of hear about your progress and again, encourage you to share where you are, where you've gotten some wins, and where maybe your struggle points are, so that, again, we can take full advantage of this collaborative learning opportunity that HQI has presented to us through the Engage program. So I promised Alhambra they wouldn't go first every time, so I'll start at the bottom this time and ask if anyone from Valley Presbyterian could share with us your recruitment efforts over the last month. Do we have anyone from Valley Presbyterian on?
And if you're muted, make sure you unmute yourself. And Libby, I don't see Ripsme or Dina on the list, so maybe they'll join a little later.
Okay, and Boris, that reminds me, if you would just call out anything in the chat box that I'm missing, that would be really helpful to me.
Sounds good.
How about San Antonio? Rita, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. This is Kim from San Antonio.
Oh,
And
hi, Kim.
Libby, you were here yesterday speaking to our nursing staff, and I've heard wonderful things from them, so thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to visit the site.
Good. Yeah, we have kind of our first draft of the application complete, and we've passed out a couple of those. We actually are utilizing, we have some current program of patient satisfaction volunteers that just kind of volunteers that go around and talk to patients in general just to find out how their visit is going. So we've actually recruited a couple people from that program because they're kind of hearing what's going on, and in both cases they themselves or their family member has been a patient. So those are our first two official applications that went out and have been returned to us. So that's where we are right now.
Terrific. And I know I chatted with Robin a little bit when I was there yesterday about kind of even broadening where those referral forms are getting out to.
Yeah, that's Rita's doing that. I'm not involved in that part so much, so I can't really speak about that with any knowledge. But I do know that as people talk to Robin's office, she's kind of pre-screening them and explaining the process of the advisory council, and so she's pulling from those people as well.
Terrific, terrific. Well, I'm sure your response will continue to increase over the coming month or so.
Yeah, I think as we get more comfortable with the process, it will become easier.
Right, right. That's always the case, and it points out something very fundamental, that this is a really new process for everybody on both sides. So, excellent. Can we get an update from Sutter?
This is Roberta. I can give you an update.
Great.
One of the things that we've done is that we're getting both of the referral materials and the standard process around this for the entire organization. So we've created kind of a template for the process, step by step happen, and then the referral forms, and each organization they can fill in their name. But our goal as a system is to standardize the approach and process as we move forward.
Right. Great. And I know you guys have had some good results out of your recruitment efforts on a system, or rather, I'm sorry, on an individual affiliate level. Anybody want to share any of those as well?
Is anyone on from Amador?
Yes, this is Jody.
Jody, I know that Kim had said you guys had about 6 potential patient-family advisors, and you were looking at somewhere in June. How are things going with that?
Well, we have about 6 patients identified, and I've actually reached out to all of them. We've received application back from one, and we have tentative dates towards mid-June scheduled for interviews. So I'm just right now waiting to hear back from the other folks that we've reached out to.
Terrific. Absolutely. Anyone else from Sutter? Any of the affiliates?
This is Therese from Sutter Solano. Hi. We received our recruitment packet from Roberta's team. We're excited about that. We have a couple of potential people in mind that we're going to be reaching out to, and then we're going to be working with our physicians and nurse managers for our further recruiting efforts.
And so will that be about, getting your referral form out to those nurse managers in terms of their getting it in front of their patients and families broadly?
Yes, we do daily leader rounding here, so we're going to be asking them to be engaging with patients and families during those rounds with the brochure.
Oh, great, great. So they'll be kind of walking your brochure to the front lines for you. Wonderful. All right. Anyone else from Sutter?
This is Chris Dale from Sutter Roseville. And hi. We have reached out to one of our former moms from our postpartum labor delivery and NICU experience. We're waiting to hear back. We have taken our message out to department managers. We've talked about it at staff meetings, that the employees and our leadership are really our front line for recruiting and the efforts we'll be making there, and we are using the tools provided by Roberta Morey and her team.
That's terrific. So you're getting the message out to your staff so they can help you really broaden where your referral goes. That's fantastic. Sometimes these efforts, take a little bit more time in terms of helping or getting the staff on board and getting the staff sort of comfortable with your vision for this work, but they can be incredible allies in supporting your recruitment efforts. Anybody else from the Sutter system? All right. How about Sonoma Valley? Oh, my goodness. I didn't say that right.
This is Chelsea from Sonoma Valley Hospital.
Hi.
Hi. We have made a referral sheet, and we have not started passing it out, and we are working on an application. Some nursing leaders have a few people in mind they'd like to talk with and send the referral form to, but we have not gotten to that stage yet.
Okay. So again, it's great if you have staff members who are thoughtful about individuals they recommend, but the ask would be that as well as just making it available to their patients and families. So just so that we can ensure that we're getting to folks that may otherwise not be included in this kind of an effort or thought of in that kind of an effort, but who may very well have the energy and the passion and the time for partnering with you. So, identifying is okay. It has its limitations, and often we see that not immediately, but maybe 3 or 6 months down the road. So that's why we encourage you to kind of back that up with really casting a wide net for recruitment as well. So sounds great. How about Santa Clara? Nobody from Santa Clara? All right, how about Shasta Regional? Can't tell if that's someone trying to speak up and get off mute. And Kauai Delta?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Judy. So we are kind of at the point where we're finalizing our referral forms, our application. We have provided education to a lot of different areas, patient care leadership, our quality council. We've added it to our strategic plan, our patient experience team, just to kind of start the to move forward with our plan. And so our next step would certainly be, and we're working with volunteer services and our marketing team to look for referral sources.
Terrific. And Judy, would you just talk a little bit about the amount of leadership buy-in that you've had for this effort and what impact that's had on your progress?
Well, we've had executive leadership support, as well as, it's part of our strategic plan is to have patient engagement and patient-family engagement. So it's very embraced here, and I think that we have this full support of our leadership team. We're just taking a more of a cautious, careful approach to it, and so
why we may seem to be behind where other people are with our recruitment, we're getting the foundation set very solidly first, and then we'll be ready to launch. So, we're very excited about it. And we have a full team. People that are engaged on our team have been with us since we attended in Pomona, and so we have a lot of support and engagement by a variety of different departments like marketing, volunteer services, the nursing staff, management, and then our patient experience director, Ed, of course. And so, we're very energized and excited.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that team approach is really is so beneficial in so many ways in terms of the entire organization being aware of the efforts around this. And you bring up the time and being behind or being in front of or what have you, and really that highlights the point that all of this work gets done very uniquely at the local level. So every organization sort of has different needs and a different pace as they go through this effort. And so what we're really looking for is that continued forward progress, which you certainly are making there. So thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you.
And how about Community Hospital of Monterey Peninsula?
Hello, this is David Wood from Community Hospital. I think we are really in line with where probably most of the other organizations are. We started by outlining all of the templated documents that we would need, everything from the referral and applications to some templated acceptance and probably rejection letters, so things of that nature. We're just working on finalizing all of those materials with our communications and marketing department. And once those are finalized, then we'll launch really with our leadership council, engaging our unit-level leadership throughout the organization to start disseminating those materials to the patients. We've also identified some patients proactively who will personally deliver applications to, but we're just waiting for those marketing materials to be finalized.
Great. Sounds like a very intentional forward progress. So wonderful. And again, just spreading that referral as far and wide as you can get across the organization, in addition to getting it in the hands of the folks that you've kind of pre-identified. And so your intention then with the ones that you've already sort of pre-identified is to have them do an application interview, do the process as well?
Yes, we see everyone following the same referral and onboarding process. I think those patients will probably just serve as a validation that our materials that we've developed are in line with what we were intending them to achieve.
Perfect. That sounds like a great plan. All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's see. And Alhambra? No, I think they were going to have difficulty today, as I recall, in getting on. So one more time with Valley Presbyterian. Were you guys able to join?
Ripsme, I see you on the webinar. Are you on the phone as well? All right.
This is Joe with Sutter Center for Psychiatry. We are on now.
Awesome.
Just want to let you know we've identified 2 former patients so far, and actually we were pretty successful. May is Mental Health Month, and we were at the state capitol yesterday, and we had a former parent come up to us who's expressed interest. So we're looking for a diverse council, so that's really good for us. So it's a win.
Terrific. Congratulations. Yeah, and as we kind of chatted about this month, it's a little bit different for a psychiatric recruitment effort. So maybe not quite as an all-open process, and we need some checks and balances in there with that particular population. So I'm glad to hear that that's expanding.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And we're going to be looking at the charter and qualifications around that 6 months or a year post-discharge, but that's why it was really good to get a parent. So, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Okay. Rasmus, was anyone from Valley able to join? Okay, well, we'll move forward. I just, again, want to reiterate the value of having these 3 touch points with your potential advisors as a method of self-selection for your potential advisors who, as they learn more and more at each of these touch points about the role and the expectations for your patient-family advisory councils, that's an opportunity for them to sort of self-select if maybe they don't have the time or aren't able to coordinate with you or collaborate with you in this way at this particular time, as well as it's an opportunity, 3 touches for each of you to sort of get to know your potential advisors for fit and for their ability to collaborate both with you as an organization as well as their peer advisors. And so I really encourage you, again, I recognize this is the heavy lifting of the program, but I do encourage you to follow through, and as was mentioned, I'm sorry? Oh. And as was mentioned, even if you have some folks that maybe have risen in your organization as potential advisors, putting those folks through these 3 steps as well just really gives that uniformity to the process and builds the structure within your organization so that it's not just about this initial advisory council, but rather that you're building that infrastructure for the sustainability of your council far beyond this initial effort.
And Libby, we have just heard from Rip Simi at Valley Presbyterian. They're having some audio difficulties, but they're on the line. And I assume that means that are you able to share now, Rip Simi, or are you still not being able to be heard? I will assume it's the latter. And Libby, I also see in the chat that Deb Mensch from Southern Auburn Faith shared. She's also having some difficulties with the audio, but she shared in the chat that they're making progress with recruitment. They have 2 applicants, and they're introducing the PFAC to in multiple meetings and councils around the organization.
Great. Thank you for calling that out, Boris. And kudos to you, Deb. I think that's, again, the broader we can get the messaging across the organization in different meetings and council settings, the more investment we get. So fantastic. Just as a reminder, as you have your next team meeting, pat yourselves on the back, pat each other on the back, and recognize that you're initiating a major organizational change and that's going to take time and resources and a continued effort. This is not launching patient-family advisory councils is not easy work. It's a different way for a lot of organizations to work, and so as you continue to trumpet that message and you start to feel like you're saying the same thing over and over and you're not sure it's resonating, encourage each other, empower one another, and keep it up because it really is the way that these messages get spread and investment for your advisory council builds. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I share this slide. Boris came up with the Cotter's model of organizational change and introduced me to it, and it was a good sense of how well the Gateway learning sessions line up with the Cotter model of organizational change. And perhaps many of you are familiar with this, but I think when we're thinking about the Gateways program and implementing a patient-family advisory council, we are changing the organization. And so to think about it in a similar way, in an implementation way, I think it's helpful to have that overall perspective of where you're moving so that you sort of understand why it's so much work and effort. So learning session 3, we'll get started on the content. Boris, this is not loading correctly on my screen, but is that just my screen, or are the titles getting cut off on yours as well?
The titles are getting cut off on mine as well. Asma, is there anything we can do about that?
Boris, we can see it correctly on my end.
It looks good too. Okay, it looks good to others on the call. So we'll keep going, and if anyone has any difficulty reading the slides, of course, Boris has posted them on the portal for your use as well. So today we'll be talking about orientation and preparation for your advisors. And the purpose for us really intentionally focusing on this area is, again, to provide that context, essentially. And we'll think about doing that in sort of 3 different levels, again, in terms of context to the organization, context to the work of an advisor, and context to the role of advisors. And so we know through providing this orientation and sort of level setting at the outset of your activities or at the outset of your engagement really empowers patients and families to move into that advisory role with some degree of confidence that they understand those expectations and they understand what the role is about. Some of the activities we'll be doing, providing preparation to the core competencies of advisors. You may choose to include some QI concepts, very simple initially, but if that's where you're onboarding your advisors, you may want to just introduce some of those concepts if you're using lean practices or what have you. And we'll certainly be outlining an orientation meeting for you. Again, the reason we do this is the realistic expectations, the balanced approach to partnership, and bringing all of your advisors into the same process at the same time kind of gives you those that level setting we know is very effective for launching your advisory council. So some of the different strategies for orientation, really this is, again, where we build from the first learning session and the work you did to identify the scope of your effort. So if you are creating an advisory council that will be informing a particular unit, then the orientation piece would be to that unit. If you are developing an advisory council that's informing your entire system, then again, that would be the orientation overview. So leaning back into what you've defined as the scope will drive that sort of first tier of orientation. Orientation, think really broadly. You can do this in a lot of different ways, and organizations have. We have wonderful examples of that. So most often it's an in-person meeting. Sometimes it's an individual in-person meeting if you're onboarding folks sort of midstream, which is not the case in this group, but I would really encourage you to do a group meeting with the advisors that you're onboarding at this point. The point person who has been interacting with your applicants through the referral and the application and interview process, really to keep consistency and continue to build on that relationship, should be kind of the facilitator, especially for the orientation where there's lots of questions that come up and lots of concerns that get addressed. You really want to have that opportunity to continue to build your relationship with your advisors. I think the most important one is that next one, the timing. So this is your orientation. I would really encourage you, strongly encourage you, to separate your orientation from your first meeting. The reason for that is if we're thinking about an orientation in terms of providing advisors context to your organization, the PFAC, and the role of the advisor, we're providing information, right? So you're giving them information. They're in the position of learner. The first meeting, which we'll talk about intentionally in the next learning session, is a time for you to build team cohesiveness, time for storytelling. It's a time for really creating those connections to move the work of your advisory council forward. What we have found over and over with advisors is if we combine that meeting, it is very difficult for advisors to shift from the learning they need to do in the orientation piece into that kind of more emotionally heavy work. And so we really find that if you separate these two meetings, you have a much greater degree of uptake and understanding of the context than if we're combining those two efforts. So that's I think, a really key learning that we have learned over the last few years as we've been preparing advisors, and something for you to really contemplate. That said, you may find that you have additional orientation pieces that need to be inserted, and you can do that after that short storytelling is done. Usually the second meeting is a good time for that, and again, we'll be really planning intentionally for that first meeting and the agenda for that encounter. So I'm not saying that you have to get every piece of orientation in the first go-round, because of course you'll still be introducing your organization to the advisors over the course of the first year. Part of their work is learning your organization. Some folks don't have an orientation meeting per se, but develop some written materials around that. And I again would encourage you that not be an either or, but maybe an and. It's really helpful for your advisors if you can start to sort of develop a notebook for them to maybe include your PowerPoint from an orientation meeting or what have you. We do have some folks that provide written materials around the orientation and then kind of have a check-in, a question and answer moment. I'm not sure that works quite as well as having a group meeting around the orientation materials. We did talk about this a little bit last session, but it is important to identify other folks in your organization who may have resources to support your orientation. A couple of you have mentioned your marketing department to maybe help you put some materials together. I hope that you've all checked in with your human resources and volunteer departments to take advantage of the materials that have already been developed in terms of your hospital-wide or your organizational orientation. Pulling them in as you develop your orientation materials, I think, and engaging in their expertise in this area is really, really helpful and provides that continuity as well. So in terms of who else might help, I've mentioned human resources. I think community outreach staff can be really helpful in this area as well in terms of, kind of making the complexity of your organization understandable to your potential advisors in the orientation material. Any media sources. We had one hospital in the Central Valley last session who went to their local media and put in press releases and got a tremendous amount of recruitment resources, but also had some assistance with what did the advisors from their community need to know about their organization to move into this role of advisor really successfully. So I want to pause there and see if there's any other areas of your hospitals that you're tapping into. I know the Sutter Hospital system has the Office of Patient Experience to tap into and support their efforts. Are there other departments that have been helpful to you that you would share with the rest of the group? Anyone?
Libby, this is Roberta. When we were meeting with one of our sites for the Sutter system, there was a comment about checking in with the quality team as you're recruiting patients, just to make sure there is nothing else pending with that potential patient advisor as you move forward. I don't know if others have had that discussion.
Okay, so the quality director, and again, that was so to ensure you weren't duplicating efforts. Is that what I understand?
Or more that there wasn't some type of legal issue or something else going on with that patient that we were unaware of.
I see. Great. Roberta, and I see your question in the chat box as well, a group orientation versus an individual one. I really do prefer the group orientation, and I do prefer a meeting along with some written materials. I think that's kind of the gold standard. But and the reason for that is, there's always more that goes on in conversation that we learn that, maybe I didn't even have that question until another advisor asked it. And so there's kind of value in that collaborative learning just as much as we're doing here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Libby. It's Morgan from Sutter.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi. I had a random question.
Yep.
I was reading somewhere that it would be a good idea to introduce your patient family advisor to some kind of mentor so that when they come on the process, they're not so intimidated. And so I know that some places already have maybe like 1 or 2 patient family advisors that they're kind of bringing on board, or maybe a really experienced volunteer in the hospital, someone like that. Would that be a good idea to have them as part of the orientation?
Yeah, actually, if you do have existing advisors, definitely having some of them involved in the orientation can be incredibly helpful. I would not as much recommend the straight volunteer in your organization because of the uniqueness of this role. However, they might be able to provide some more insight in the organization overall, as long as they weren't, necessarily speaking to the role of the PFAC or the advisor themselves. So, within that scope domain, that would be a great one. And mentoring, a nice place if you do have existing advisors, a nice place to introduce those folks is in the interviews. So if you feel like you have existing advisors who are really confident in contributing to the PFAC in the way that your charter has outlined it, then by all means, I would suggest you introduce them in the interview process, and then sort of set up that mentoring or at least an additional touch point. When we launch advisory councils, we really set up that facilitator person to be the mentor and support that onboarding as well until the relationships get established among the advisors themselves. Great question. Thank you, Morgan. Any other questions or ideas around who else might be helpful to you? All right, we'll keep moving then. So in terms of, and maybe many of you are familiar with adult learning principles, but in terms of preparing orientation materials, I think it's incredibly valuable to refresh yourself on the principles of adult learning, which is very different than learning in any other capacity. And when I reviewed these, and the references there for you, when I reviewed these, in particularly thinking about the role of advisors, this is really well set up. So we know that adults are internally motivated and self-directed, and that's why we put the referral out broad, right? That's why we cast the wide net, so that those that we may not be in contact with who are internally motivated and self-directed in this work can bubble to the surface and have a space in your environment. We're bringing these folks in because they do have life experiences and knowledge about your organization. So this is really, you can see the symmetry in the adult learning principles and the way that you're onboarding your advisors. Adults are goal-oriented. That's why we want that strategic plan front and center in your charters, because wherever you're tying in, they want to know that they're going to have impact, that they're there for a purpose that the organization sees and that they can now see as well. They're relevancy oriented. If, I've said it once, I've said it a million times, use them or lose them. They want to create that partnership and impact, but if they feel like they're being asked to comment on things that maybe are outside the real important work of the organization, early on in my journey as an advisor, if we were asked about the paint or the fabric color on the chairs, that was enough. that isn't the case anymore. And so we really want to be relevant to the heart of the organization, and we understand our relevancy if you share the organization with us, as well as if you share the strategic goals with us. Adults are practical, and so your orientation materials should be very practical and straightforward. And we don't need to understand every dotted line versus solid line of reporting, but it is good for us to have an understanding of the who has responsibility across the campus, and where do they break up into units. That kind of information is really helpful. And then that learners, obviously, like everybody, likes to be respected, and so I'm confident your orientation materials will reflect that. This is an adult learning video that I really like, again, as a refresher, and it's a quick 3-minute video that articulates the principles of adult learning, but also really demonstrates it in a clever cartoons that, again, just puts it in the front of your mind about how you might be thinking about presenting this information to your advisors. So the orientation components, what do you need to design your orientation program? I've already alluded to it, but we really want our advisors to understand the organization. And as patients and families who may be treated in one area of your hospital, we're just not always aware that there is a leadership structure that runs your organization, that how it's broken down, how folks relate to each other, and where that work is. And so having just a very broad stroke overview of your org chart is incredibly helpful to understanding and providing the context to advisors so that they're not making suggestions that are not relevant to the organization, or that won't move forward in the way that they're thinking about it. The more context we provide them, the better and more relevant their impact. Secondly, and we're going to support you with some of these materials, and perhaps some of you have been looking around or connecting with other organizations that have PFACs. That's great. We're going to talk about what is a Patient Family Advisory Council. And so often when we would start advisory councils without this sort of baseline preparation and understanding, we'd get into the first meeting, and the hospital staff and organizers would be looking at the advisors, and the advisors would be looking back, and everybody thought the other would be taking the lead. That advisors just naturally understood what patient-family-centered care was, or patient-family engagement, and so that they were going to inform in that way. And that's where we really learned the value of just introducing the concept of an advisory council, maybe giving a little bit of history about it if you have existing councils in your organization. And so, again, we'll be providing some pieces for that orientation. And then finally, to the role of advisor, like how do we want people to approach this work, and really grounding us in mutual expectations around that role and how that's going to be put into action. I should say that including all of these may sound large and overwhelming, and I don't really think it needs to be. I think that you can cover all three of these components really successfully in a 2-hour encounter. It's not that you have to go so deep, but you have to provide this background information in order for advisors to give impact. So in terms of the first area, the orientation to your hospital, these are just some of the components that you might want to consider including. Your organizational mission, I think, is really important, and maybe this helps, this activity even helps your organization a little bit to reconnect with their mission. And I've seen that happen in a really wonderful way, because as staff are sharing the mission of the hospital and watching the understanding occur in the advisors, they're also sort of renewing their own commitment to the mission of the hospital. So I think that is a really amazing opportunity and moment for launching your advisory council. I mentioned that overall org chart. Just really, if you have a quality department, if you have safety department, really being mindful of those areas of your hospital that are not immediately visible to your patients and families. Thinking about those areas and how can you bring them into this work. And that may be, more hidden kinds of services even, like, one organization had the lab come in and did a significant orientation around what goes on in the lab, just because there wasn't an understanding. Most of that work is invisible to the patient and the family. And so the more context you can provide, the more relevant the feedback and suggestions and ideas that come out of your council will be. So including that organizational chart. The strategic goals, which you mentioned in your vision statement, you put them into your charter. You really need to pull those out in your orientation and put them on the center of the table. This is so important to connecting advisors to the goals of the advisory council, and really in a very practical way, demonstrating to the advisors that you are being brought in as a strategy to help us meet these goals, and provide a perspective that's not currently in your organization. So really pulling those goals out and talking about them a little bit, talking about, if that goal is around HCAP scores, and giving them a little information about what HCAP scores are and how those measures are impacting the organization directly, and giving some ideas around that. That's also a really nice area for your leadership to come in. So on your applications for the ENGAGE program, you designated an executive leader who was really supporting this effort. Having that individual come and speak to that support and, again, create that connection to the strategic goals is a very powerful message to your advisors that this is a very valued effort within the organization, and, again, sort of sets that mutual expectation for impact. Looking at the organizational improvement structures is really helpful. So, I mentioned, I think, my desire to get free parking at the hospital that my kids were served at, and so I trumpeted that for a long time until I learned that it was paying for the security department, and because I got that context, obviously that goal needed to be shifted, or it needed to be, kind of reshaped in a way that made sense to the organization. As well, we need to introduce patients and families to the improvement structure. So if that is a concern, how does that improvement goal of getting free parking, how does that fit into your organizational improvement? Well, it probably fits into, with this particular organization, they did a lot of lean events, and so they were doing lean events around improving the patient experience. And providing free parking would definitely improve the patient experience. So we need to introduce advisors to what those improvement structures and avenues look like in your organization, so that they can bring forward those ideas and impact in the channels that make sense to the organization. And then as part of the org chart, just giving sort of a high-level view of those reporting structures. Again, I don't need to see every dotted line, but it's useful to me to see that quality is above the nurse managers in your organization, or that the nurse managers report to quality, so that they have some understanding of how valued this work is across your organization. In terms of, let me stop there and see if there's any questions about the organizational component of the orientation.
Conference muted.
Here's some muting and unmuting. Anybody have a question?
Maybe this is Roberta. I think it's really a good point to talk about the organizational structure. I think that a lot of times when our patients come in, they have no idea about the internal complexity of an organization. And I think it helps to show, how things line up and what would be the communication structure up to that supporting executive if they had questions or if they had points to discuss further.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of by providing this framework to your advisors, you're missing a lot of why don't you just conversations. Why don't you just make parking free? Why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? You're giving them a glimpse into why you don't just. And when you do this in an organizational orientation, then you have that on the table to lean back on when those conversations come up within the context of your advisory council. And that's why I also encourage you to give it in writing as well, so that you can say, remember in your orientation we talked about, and there it is. That's why this doesn't fit here. How can we make it fit, sort of over here? It will help you moving forward in those conversations. Any other comments? Okay. You did see in the bubble there that if you do not have your confidentiality agreement signed yet by that point, that's a perfect time to do those, to get those signed in your organizational orientation. And again, even though we're thinking about 3 components, it's not necessarily 3 different meetings, really. It's or 3 different touch points. It's really one continuous orientation at these different levels. So moving on then to the Patient Family Advisory Council structure and some of the orientation pieces that you want to provide there. One, I think it's really helpful to connect your advisors to the larger effort. So whether that's across your corporate structure, or whether that's across the state of California through HQI, or whether that's to national standards, just providing the example that your hospital is implementing a best practice that has been implemented at other organizations, and even though it's new from you, that you have a lot of resources to draw on. I think that's amazing to even be able to say that now, because certainly 10 years ago we were not saying that. But now we have organizations like ours, like PFCC partners, like the Institute for Patient Family Centered Care, Barrel, and others, where we have exemplars for this work. So there's tying your advisors to that is really, I think, gives them and gives you more credibility and more understanding of the relevance of their role. I think the most important thing to make very clear to your advisors is that they are being engaged in this advisory council as a strategy, as an active strategy. I think, when we think of advisors as individuals, and we think of advisors sort of as a revered guest in our organization, or a token in our organization, we absolutely limit their impact. And so just as you and I have been talking a lot about engaging your advisors as a key strategy to meeting the goals the organization has already identified as being really important, we want to pass that message on to your advisors. And you can see that doing so really frames for them some expectations about what they can expect in terms of the work and what that's going to look like. That they're going to ask to be active, that they're going to, have an opportunity to provide their ideas and input, and so you're really making that clear. Reviewing the vision, we know, again, why are you creating a PFAC? Why now in your organization? Sharing that vision and sharing it with enthusiasm. And sharing it with transparency and saying, we haven't done this before, and so we're looking to learn with you and co-design this advisory council moving forward. So reviewing the vision and then reviewing the pieces of the charter, all of the pieces to go into it in a little bit more depth, and create the expectation that we do look forward to that co-design of this advisory council with you. And so we'll be reviewing this charter in in 3 to 6 months once the advisory council has sort of been in the environment and that contextual education has gone on, and we'll be co-designing. Does this make sense in our environment with our advisors? And so you're kind of previewing that expectation. And again, the clearly defined expectation as you've written, to the level that you've written detail into your charter, it's important. So if you've decided to go with more detail and you're really going to stick to that, then that needs to be clearly defined up front. If you have kept it, a little bit open-ended so that you're really the expectation is around this active strategy, then that needs to be communicated. So whatever your expectations are really need to be clearly communicated and defined. The org chart that you did in the first organizational orientation will support your conversation around the communication loop. We encouraged you to put a communication loop into your charters so that you and your advisors have a very clear pathway of, items are going to come into the PFAC for agenda by this method. They will funnel through our facilitator. We will discuss these in the advisory council meetings, and any action or recommendations we make will then go back out to the organization through that method, and then how will that loop get closed. So we know as advisors, if we have worked really hard on a visitation guidelines or a policy, where did that go? How did it get back? Who's responsible to bring it to the organization and let them know the outcomes? That communication loop for your advisors is everything. That backs up everything that you've been telling them about them being a strategy for improvement and meeting your strategic goals, because you're showing them the relevancy of their actions within the council. So that's a really critical piece to make clear to your advisors through this orientation. And then partnership language, that would be the core concepts of patient family-centered care, and having a discussion about strength-based language, and so including that as the goal really of your patient family advisory council is to partner for improvement. And so what kinds of language do we use, and how are those terms sort of received? What are those terms we can use that leave the door open? That partnership language builds right into the next component, which is the patient family advisor. So it's a nice segue for you straight into that third level of orientation. Things to include on your Patient Family Advisory Council orientation: confirm the facilitator's contact information, make sure everybody knows who to go to. Every advisor knows that their point of contact for the PFAC activities are, who that is, who that point person is. That avoids, just reiterating it. It not only serves to continue to build your relationship, but it also avoids advisors calling, a nurse manager that they're really comfortable with, or a director that they're really comfortable with, or a CEO that they maybe don't know but would like to know. And so making it transparent and easy for your advisors to contact and connect with the right person for these activities, being the facilitator, and sort of where that fits within the overall organizational chart is really important. And even though you've had those contacts before, just being very clear about that again. It's also a time to reconfirm their commitment to the advisory council and the activities, and an opportunity for them to ask questions if they misunderstood perhaps what the work was about through the application and interview process. Now that they've got some clarity, is this something that's going to work for you. And as we mentioned, this can be a self-selection opportunity, and I don't want you to be afraid of that. I have seen so many organizations, go. They're familiar with some patients in the environment, and so they pull them into this activity in this advisory council, and then the advisor at some point says, I'm not really sure this is me, or I don't have the time, or what it might be, and the facilitators in the organization work so hard to convince this person to stay. I don't want you to be afraid of losing advisors. If they get to this orientation piece and it's not for them, allow that to be a self-selection opportunity, because in 3 months, that person's going to be dragging the whole group. And so it's okay. This work isn't for everybody, and councils aren't for everybody. There may be a really wonderful focus group that is much more targeted for what that person wants to do and can do and is able to do. So don't be afraid to let go. I would rather have you have 3 advisors on your council who are all in, self-motivated, ready to partner with you and grow from there, than to have 12 and you've got a few that are just sort of, you're pulling teeth or pulling through mud. I know that's a little disconcerting for a lot of folks, but I just want to frame and to maybe preview for you how that's going to look down the road 3 to 6 months. You want to provide the logistical information for the first meeting, and going back to Berwick's top 10 list for redesigning healthcare. Yes. I'm sorry, Boris, did you have a question?
I apologize, Libby.
Oh, no problem. And going back to that top 10 list, and one of them was make it easy. So this is a great opportunity to make it as easy as possible for your advisors to get to the first meeting. So including specifically where they can park, maybe even having someone, wherever the meeting is going to be, maybe even having someone meet them up front. These are the things that you can introduce will be happening at that first meeting. Review reimbursement needs or methods. So if we're thinking about this work as a volunteer, but it should never cost a volunteer to participate, what do you need to remove for them to be fully participatory on your campus? Is that a parking voucher? Is that a meal voucher? Are you going to be offsetting child care costs with a gift card? Whatever that might be, go ahead and go over that. And what do they need to do? If they need to be sure they sign in and out so that you can provide those vouchers, then that's the process. But review those reimbursement needs up front. Any additional or badging requirements that your organization is going to require of your advisors, and how they get that done. When I started on the advisory council at Miller's, we didn't have a badging requirement, and later on it became evident that it was not even a requirement, but it would be really beneficial to our advisors as we were getting more integrated into the environment. But we were not really shown how to get that done. So where is security? Walking down, getting the physical badge application and photograph finished, and it's really nice. A lot of organizations will set aside a specific time, whether that be in the second meeting or in your orientation, to walk the group down as a group and manage those badging requirements. So being thoughtful about that and including that in your advisory council logistics and your orientation. And then if you are intending to have any virtual meetings, what those requirements might be. And we're seeing more hospitals, especially our rural hospitals, having quarterly in-person supplemented by virtual meetings in between. And that's a really nice model if transportation and your distance, your geographical distance, is a barrier. So reviewing any of those ideas. Take pictures at your first orientation. This is an incredible moment for you guys. You're starting something really brand new. And as you continue to build on your recruitment efforts and take your messages around to different areas of your hospital, it's fantastic to have pictures to share. And I really would encourage you to photo document your entire journey. Even, we asked you for team meeting photos, so taking a picture of your team and starting with that. This is, again, an incredible journey that you're undertaking, and a lot of it will be invisible to your organization, but it's really important for them, your organization, as well as your advisors, to understand the journey that you've been on and the infrastructure that you've put in place and the intentionality you have undertaken in setting this up. So in terms of the patient-family advisor orientation, I stop again and ask, are there any questions about the orientation pieces to include in the advisory council component?
Libby, it's Morgan again.
Uh-huh.
Just wondering, so you've said, include the org chart and things like that. Do you ever think it's a good idea to talk about maybe the culture of the hospital, explain kind of those aspects in the orientation? And how would you go about doing that?
So my answer was going to be, yeah, I think that would be really interesting. And then I was going to ask you, how would you do that?
Okay, cool.
I think, by introducing your mission of your organization and building that piece out a little bit, you start to get to the culture piece. But boy, we do a lot of site visits, and the one thing I know is when you visited one hospital, you visited one hospital. They're also culturally unique in that way, and so it would be really interesting to think about and ask that question of our community members to see how do they build in that cultural piece of, this is sort of how our organization works and how our org chart gets implemented here. Any ideas from anybody else on the call in that regard?
This is Roberta. Not that I have an answer about the culture, but I think it's something that, it's difficult to really tell what the culture is, but sometimes as we have toured different hospitals, it's palpable. You can feel when it's good, you can feel when it's tense, right? And sometimes it's tense because the ER is full and there might be, other things going on. And I think it just warrants an initial discussion about, healthcare is a lot like a body. There's a pulse in the hospital when things are going awry. And I think you just start talking a little bit about, there's a lot going on, and you may not know what it is, but you might be able to sense it, and you'll get more aware of that the more exposure you have to the affiliate.
Yeah, those are.
Yesterday, Morgan is starting to work on. We're developing a standard tool for onboarding, and we've got some acronyms in there because I don't know about the rest of the facilities, but I'll tell you, we use those very richly. And if you don't know, you feel really left out. But she said to me, how do people know what med-surg means, or ICU, or what is tele? And I thought, gosh, these are terms that in healthcare we just flip around very easily, and people don't often know what those mean. So I think definition of terms is a key point in helping people understand the complexity of a healthcare organization.
Sure, and oh, go ahead, Boris.
And to start speaking the language of patients and families rather than expect them to speak our language all the time, right?
Good point. Yeah, there's compromise there, right? And the other part of it is recognizing that different acronyms mean different things in different departments. So if you're in physical therapy, ROM means range of motion, and if you're in OB, it means something totally different that I can't remember right now.
Rupture of membranes.
There you go. So yeah, I think that the list of acronyms, one of the ways to think about that is, to Boris's point, start developing it from the other perspective. What do I need to know? And these are the ones that I'm confused about. So it's, I think, meeting that common ground, if you will. But great point.
Libby,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, often when we talk about culture, it's not like that is hidden from the families and patients. Often families and patients actually have very good insights into what our culture is just by, who they are in our midst. And maybe a better question is, what kind of culture do we want to become? And not only including our employees on that desire, on that dream, or on that the aspiration, but also our families and patients. And then the question becomes, how can you help us become the culture that we desire to become?
And one of the things I was thinking of including in that vein was maybe pain points. So, you could introduce those strategies, like the metrics that they're going toward, right, in that part of the orientation, but do you also kind of break down what those metrics really mean? Like, here are the pain points, the ED overcrowding or things like that, without scaring people too much?
I would hold that off, Morgan. I think that gets into more specifics around how you're going to work together, more than that overview of the framework for your organization. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so maybe that's like a first meeting kind of topic instead.
Like a second meeting, yeah, after you do the team building. Yep. Then I think talking about pain points and to Boris's point, allowing your advisors to inform, one of the questions I always ask advisors is where do people struggle in your organization? And they often have a different answer than the organization itself. So making space for those ideas to augment your ideas of where your pain points are is really helpful. But then, doing the deeper dive into what, we have to report on these measurements or metrics, and this is what they mean, and this is why they're important to us, whether that's money left on the table or whatever it might be, but really being transparent about those motivations. But that's in a subsequent meeting. The other thing I was going to say on your culture question as well, that a lot of organizations do with their initial advisors or their advisors as they're onboarding, is to do a walk around the hospital. If you have a real small hospital, and chances are they've seen it, that might not bring so much value. But particularly in our larger organizations, that can be really helpful again in broadening the perspective of the advisor in terms of the complexity of the hospital and how that how many different services are available and how that all sort of gets organized. Great discussion. Okay.
Libby, just to note, there's a lingering question by Ed in chat.
I'm sorry, Ed.
Answered, but I don't know if he got a satisfactory answer. Maybe just to double check.
So in terms of the recommended tools for the communication loop, you can think, and I can share some more examples with you. I think there's one on the portal, but if not, you can kind of think about that as a graphic, if you will, in terms of where information is going to, again, come in. So the points of contact are, where does that agenda item come to your advisory council? Through the facilitator, I would guess. How does it get on the agenda in terms of what's the priority around that? And then, once the advisory council sort of acts on that agenda item, who's responsible for taking it back to in the hospital that it came to? And then who is closing that loop in terms of any decisions that are made from those recommendations or any actions that are taken? That's the critical piece, is we really need to see the impact we're having. Even if our recommendations are not being implemented, that's okay, but to know that they were considered and discussed and they went to medical executive committee and were discussed and these are the reasons they're bouncing back, we need to have that kind of information for us to continually invest in the organization. All right. Okay, so moving into the final, and so you can kind of see that this orientation is not so burdensome. It's not that it's this huge amount of work, but rather the components all fit together pretty nicely. So we'll finish with the advisor orientation components. Again, you want to link your advisors to the national community of advisors, where they do that through our PFA network or across your system or whatever it might be. That's really, it's incredibly helpful. I just can't tell you how much we all worked in isolation until about 5-6 years ago, and then we got that definition going, and now we've got some core competencies around that work, and so it's really useful to tie to other advisors for us so that we have some common expectation of the work. And initially when we started that network, I know a lot of organizations were a bit concerned that, what if they come back with all these ideas that they're doing at, Johns Hopkins and we're not there yet, we just got started. That really doesn't come out in that way, or at least it hasn't so far that I've been aware of or been made aware of. And if it did, you would lean back into the framework that you've set up, the structure of the charter and the communication loop and the scope for your hospital and where you are in your journey. So more often it's just a chance for us to sort of connect, and in fact I've seen the opposite be quite true of, you're not being patient enough, you're developing. You have to put your time in to develop and co-design with your organization before you can get into, those big impact areas. So it's kind of a balancing for them. And I think that really benefits you as an organization or as staff working with your advisory councils to kind of have those realistic expectations in the environment. The core competencies that we'll give you on the next slide, and I'll talk to those a little bit more. The ingredients of partnership, again, that's around the partnership language, so respect and all of those things. And I'll be sharing that with you in just a slide or two. And really important to touch upon the fact that the advisors are coming in to share their experience in the context of change. So I'd really encourage you, to set up the idea that we will have time for sharing your story in the first meeting. After that first meeting, we're not sharing patient stories in the way, in terms of the advisory council. We'll be sharing experiences that are tied to the context in the agenda. So I may share an experience we had in the ED around wait times if that's our agenda item, but it's going to be specific and tied in. That's a critical piece of information for your advisors to have impact. It's also really important to curtailing a lot of storytelling with the absence of the structure of the impact that you've worked really hard to set up. And then we talk as well about the value of moving to representative voice. So the work of the advisors is not solely from the first person perspective, that their experience on your campus may be more largely representative of most folks served on your campus. And so we really need to move beyond our own agendas in this work and take the responsibility of being that representative voice.
All right, thank you.
And here's the definition, and I apologize that the reference flipped off this slide. I'll make sure that gets on. But this is the definition of patient-family advisor that was co-written with 25 advisors at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Some folks have changed it a little bit, and of course, you're welcome to create something from this that makes sense to you, but you're also welcome to use it and reference it. I honestly cannot tell you how much this helped move advisory councils forward when it was created 5-6 years ago, and still contributes to that community, because we had a common understanding, a common definition around what our role was. And that's really, really valuable to someone moving into this work. Soon after we developed this, I shared it with a group in South Orange County, and the gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, now I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I've been on this council for 2 years. I don't want you guys to have that kind of experience. I don't want your advisors to have that kind of experience, because most advisors won't hang out for 2 years if they don't know what they're doing. So providing these pieces of foundation to them, although it may seem obvious to you, it's really incredibly helpful to tie to the larger community of advisors across the country. This you're also welcome to use, and the reference fell off from this as well. But this is core competencies that were developed by the Patient Family Advisor Network in our organization. So at its basis, we need advisors that can establish partnerships so that they can initiate partnerships and come to that together, if you will. That advisors remain constructively collaborative, using strengths-based language, recognizing opportunities, not just obstacles, all of those things. Staying solution-focused and being willing to partner with you to co-design solutions so that they work for the clinical staff, for the patients and families, and for the organization overall. Representative voice we talked about, but it's really important to put that in front of folks as an expectation for this work. And then finally, the advisors who maintain a teachable spirit. That's what we ask our healthcare partners to do, and that's what we want to deliver on as well, is to really approach this work with an open mind that there are things we don't know about running a hospital. That, by the way, is now very evident after you've done your organizational orientation. Just as much as there are things about being a patient or family member in your hospital that you may not know. And so when we come together with that teachable spirit, that's where we really make some progress. Partnership language, again, this is a definition for patient-family-centered care. Let's not assume that patients and families know what that is, but rather give them the definition. Some ingredients of partnership that you can, again, augment with. You can see the list, and we've hit on most of those, but those are ingredients of partnership. These are how we want people approaching this work. Intentional storytelling, you're just going to touch on it in this advisory orientation in terms of creating experiences in context of the agenda items. We're going to touch a lot more on this in our next learning session, and so for your advisors, you'll be setting up that expectation for the first meeting as well. And again, we'll be reviewing this in a lot greater detail, so I'm just going to let you know that we'll be talking about the journey of the story, and sharing that with your advisors is really helpful as well to creating that expectation around, we start with our own personal experience, but then how do we develop that story so that it is representative in nature. So your assignments for this next learning session, continue with that recruitment, continue those assignments, create a plan for orienting your advisors, assemble any other team members that you need from other parts of your organizations, identify, I'm sorry, I apologize that this slide is not updated, identify resources for your hospital-wide orientation, schedule a time to provide your orientation to your advisors. With our last couple of minutes, we just wanted at this point in the collaborative to remind you that the Engage program was really set up to help you achieve the 5 patient-family engagement metrics that you'll be reporting on in the HEN 2.0 work. The exciting news, I think, this week is that CMS has released an addendum to these metrics, which have been challenging for a lot of organizations because we've got hospitals of different sizes and resources. And so the addendum, I believe Boris sent it to you before the meeting. I would really encourage you to take a look at that and get a broader perspective of sort of how CMS is looking at meeting each of these metrics. They convened a committee of about 20 of us to work on that addendum to really give meaning to these particular metrics to help our organizations to really achieve those and report positively on those, because we really want to see California really take off in this area, and the hospitals that are on this call are really, leading the way with that. So I would encourage you to take a deep dive on that. And if you have any questions, you certainly can get in touch with Boris or myself. All right, so reminders, date and time and location for your first meeting should be on the books. Recruitment never ends. Continue to communicate your vision across the organization. We heard some great examples of that today. Don't forget to communicate your enthusiasm and excitement for it as well. Adapt to your local resources, look into your community, and do not sit with roadblocks. We're really here to coach. I know we have a longer span this month, between these next two learning sessions, so please feel free to get in touch with us in those office hours. All right, Boris, I think I came in right there on the dot at 1:30.
Thank you, Libby. So let me just acknowledge that Alexi has had the phone difficulties and wasn't able to contribute to sharing. I'm reading from the chat in the last few seconds of our webinar, Alexi from Santa Clara. Let me share also to add on this meeting in terms of culture and language that it's important to work collaboratively with language services in translating some of the information into different languages, using sixth grade level per se, and incorporating spelling out the words emergency and other abbreviations. So you all can read what Alexi wrote in the chat. And
Thank you,
out of respect for everybody's time, I wanted to make sure that we end quickly. And on this slide, you have the link to the evaluation of the webinar today. This is your way to claim your CE credit. So you can click from here. We'll also be sending it out to everybody by email shortly. I apologize again for the audio difficulties that we've had. And Libby told you about your homework assignments. Our next learning session is July 27th, holding successful first meetings. So it's a big gap between now and then, and use that time to have at least one office hours opportunity with Libby, and you know how to do that schedule with Nicole. We've announced that before. So with that in mind, I would like to thank Libby and all of you for attending. Libby, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us again. And thank you, everybody, for your time. And keep in touch on your progress. And have a great day.
Thank you, Boris.
Thank you.